Thanks, Anthony. Rushanara, please.
Hello. Hi. Thank you very much. So there were apologies if there's any repetition because you've covered quite a lot of ground. But I wanted to start off with Sir John, just picking up on the questions around the varying priorities that government has, levelling up, decarbonisation, and of course, you know, we all want to see a jobs-led infrastructure investment process as well. How do you think, you know, given your role in the NIC, how do you balance the role of infrastructure and generating economic growth with these objectives around levelling up and net zero? And obviously you've got the opportunity to think much more longer term. Where do you see that sort of trade-off and balance heading?
Well, there's no contradiction between seeking to improve the regions of the UK and their productivity and their economic activity, and Britain being competitive on the world stage and having a productive economy. So, in overall terms, we are simply required to say what are the infrastructure needs in the key 6 economic infrastructure sectors over the next 25 to 30 years, and how do we think those can be best planned, and what is it that's actually going to physically be at the scale of what's going to be required over that period. And in doing that, the one single ingredient that you have now actually in legislative terms is net zero. I mean, as Paul has said, net zero actually now I think net zero is a wonderful thing because it provides clarity of outcome. And without a clarity of outcome, you're going to struggle with anything. So you are always going to say, in terms of, for example, energy, which is one of the biggest challenge of all probably, I think, is our energy policy. And how is our energy policy going to deliver a net zero world by 2050? And how do we do that in a way which is very successful for the UK? So people will say, well, we can develop new technologies, which in fact part of that, for example, hydrogen. If Britain can take a leap forward in the development of hydrogen technology, which could address 22% of our carbon emissions in heat, whether it's for domestic use or for business use, in addressing that and getting moving on that quickly, we give Britain a competitive advantage in that whole hydrogen sector in the world. But it needs a clear policy very, very quickly. It needs it now, frankly. And we're hoping that the National Infrastructure Strategy, when it's published by the government, they're looking to publish, we're told, in the autumn. Energy and the Energy White Paper are going to be central to that. And because if we don't make these decisions and we aren't able to address these issues in the short term, in the next 5 years or so, then we won't get to net zero by 2050.
Right. So we need to see that in the strategy that will be published. Can I just press you on the levelling up agenda and how you see, you know, you talk about the opportunity set by net zero. Can you just, I know I'm asking you to look into a crystal ball, but given your long-term focus, what would you say in terms of what's needed to rebalance the economy, using that net zero as the opportunity to do it, and you know, in parallel, actually consciously, you know, it doesn't matter who's in government. I think that's an agenda across different parties. There'll be agreement in whether you call it, you know, levelling up or something else about doing that. How do you see the two working in tandem rather than a kind of in competition, if you like? And where do you see the system going?
Well, there is a natural affinity in energy and in hydrogen and carbon capture storage, because such work as is going on in the UK at the moment on these programs is being done in the northwest and the northeast. And carbon capture storage is largely going to be in the North Sea. So again, it's those industries and those businesses which are seeing a fallback from their oil and gas activity in the north, who have the potential to actually really benefit from an intent to develop carbon capture storage and be putting that carbon back in the underground wells which we've created by taking out oil and gas over the last 50 years. So there is a direct link in that sense. Now, equally, as we've already talked about HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail, these are all projects which the NIC has recommended and supported in the past. We specifically were asked to look at rail in the north way back in 2015-16, which we did and gave a report to the government about the need to improve rail and road connectivity between the major cities in the north to improve the performance and the agglomeration of business and the ease of travel between those cities in the north. That's been on the table now for 5 years. This is a great example. That's been on the table as an opportunity. People in the north have seen it. We've seen it for 5 years. We're still talking about it. The government is hoping again to produce an integrated rail plan at the end of this year. It'll be another 5 years beyond that at least before you see any shovels in the ground on those projects. And then eventually in 10 or 15 years time, you'll see some of those projects coming through and those benefits flowing through. And it's because these major projects do take a long time that it's so important that we focus on this front end activity of deciding the outcomes we want and why it is we're going to build something and then moving on to what we're going to build. And if we real focus on that with a consistent policy, it needs to be a cross-party policy. It can't be something where, in fact, one government introduces something and then 5 years later, another government comes in and says, oh, we don't want any of that, we're going to change it. And back you go to square one. There needs to be as much as possible cross-party support for these schemes.
Yeah. Just on that, do you feel that we lost time on things like carbon capture storage, which was something that the last Labour government started to think about and invest in, or are we still on track?
No, I don't think we are on track because I don't think we are. I don't think any government has given sufficient really focus and support to working with. This is a great case of private and public working together. The private sector doesn't know at the moment what's government policy going to be. Is it going to support this? And the government has allocated several £100 million on and off over the last few years to carbon capture storage. And of course, again, the worst thing it can do is say, well, we're going to put X hundred million into this, and then 3 years later, oh, we stopped the program because we're not so sure as to whether it's the right program or not.
So the single
government has enormous influence on this.
Okay, I noticed, Paul, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so it's just to pick up on the energy issue that Sir John was talking about, and I think you've two very quick points. I mean, if you look at the nuclear industry, we've got a huge new nuclear power station being built in Somerset, which is creating massive employment in not only in that part of the world, but there are specialist engineering companies all the way across the UK that are providing the specialist engineering services into that project. The next scheme that is planned is over at Sizewell on the East Coast. It is likely that with the learning that the industry is getting from that one project, that the costs will probably come down by about 20% because of continuous learning and improvement. If that project doesn't go ahead, then all of that learning is lost. And if I extend that into the wider nuclear industry in this country, it's been an industry that's been on off for many years, and we all know why, because of the acceptability or not of nuclear. But I think it is seen to be it's a zero carbon product at the end of the day for energy. So I think vital for part of our future mix. But there's another fledgling industry that the UK could take a global lead in if successive governments are prepared to support it, and that's tidal energy. We've probably got a world leading developing market in tidal energy, which is based up in Scotland. So Alison will be delighted to quiz us on that. And we could take a global world leading position in tidal energy if we are focused on it.
can I just interject there? I just had one more question for you, which is how much weighting decision makers in industry give to whole life emissions versus financial returns on investment, and whether you've got any examples. You can submit them in writing if you want, but we just wanted to get a sense of that around.
Yeah, look, I think probably not enough time is spent on whole life emissions these days. I think it's interesting that in privately funded deals, usually the developer of a project is responsible for running that building or that project forward for its lifetime, or at least 25 to 30 years, and therefore the cost of running that building is a really significant part of the overall envelope. But too often projects are just decided on by the lowest capital cost, and the lowest capital cost will almost certainly use in it some of the least efficient energy, heating and ventilation and lighting systems, and so the two are complete.
Is that just to say, is that an area where government could do much more around, either through legal changes and guidance?
I think it probably doesn't need legal changes. It actually just needs absolutely clear procurement strategies and targets that actually say, I want to buy the cheapest hospital that will be the cheapest for me to build and operate for 25 years. Right. And that will drive the industry to provide really low cost energy solutions.
Right. Okay. Just one question, final question to James. Have you talked to the Treasury about how it intends to revise its Green Book guidance to ensure environmental implications of its infrastructure investment decisions are properly considered and costed to support its net zero target?
That's not a specific area we've discussed with them yet. I mean, their review is ongoing. We've probably had more discussions on how the methodology might apply in terms of levelling up and regional investment decisions, rather than on the net zero piece yet.
Who should be having that conversation with the Treasury? If it's not you guys.
Well, it's a dialogue. I'd say the dialogue in the Green Book is ongoing. It's certainly an area that we will look at in our national infrastructure assessment, and certainly open to offer advice to Treasury on it. It's just not an area that we've proactively focused our finite resources on over the last 3 or 4 months, certainly since I've been in charge of the Infrastructure Commission. But it's certainly not an area that I would rule out as doing further work in.
So Nick, you had your hand up, and just there was one issue that came up earlier in terms of EIB and 90% EIB funding. I don't know if that's if anyone would like to volunteer an answer to that. Do you feel the UK government is compensating and heading towards compensating for that 90% of EIB funding? There was a reference, I think Paul mentioned it would be good to have that equivalent. Are we there yet? How far off are we? Nick?
Yeah, let me briefly touch on that, and I'll come back to the question you just asked of James. So EIB, we've actually officially left, because we are officially now out of the European Union. And there was an Infrastructure Finance Review commissioned in March 2019. That reports out in the autumn alongside the National Infrastructure Strategy, at which point the Treasury will decide on what is the vehicle to replace the EIB. So I do expect an announcement shortly that will clarify that space for us. Just getting back to how we deal with these levelling up issues and the net zero, I am aware the Treasury is working not only on bringing more guidance to the Green Book, where actually if you read the detail, it is quite good, but complex. And I think the challenge is to make it less complex as it relates to those social benefit realisations and assessments. But they are going to provide what's called the public value framework, which is going to look at setting metrics and guidance on things like levelling up, things like net zero, and have 4 pillars of goals, inputs, engagement and stewardship. So I think we're going to get a lot more clarity on how across government, once the NIS is published, we can take the right lens on deciding which projects to go forward with and how they meet the targets and metrics that are to be set.
Great, thank you very much. I think my time's up well over time. Apologies, Joe.